The story often begins with a lone visionary. We picture Christopher Columbus as a rogue sailor, brave enough to cross an ocean that others supposedly feared would end in a flat, watery abyss. But by 1492, the shape of the planet was no longer a mystery. Educated Europeans had known the Earth was a sphere for centuries. Columbus's real departure from the norm was his math. He insisted the globe was significantly smaller than it actually is, placing the eastern coast of Asia just a few thousand miles west of Europe. This model made a voyage across the open Atlantic look like an economically viable shortcut to Asian gold and spices, a path that would allow Spain to bypass the Portuguese routes around Africa. This 15th century map reflects that logic. The Latin text and drawings show the known landmasses of Europe, Africa, and Asia, leaving no room for any other continents to exist between the western shores and the east. Spain approved the mission based on this specific promise of a short, direct route. By signing the contract, the monarchs were funding an expedition that required the Atlantic to be empty for its survival. By late 1492, the reality of the crossing grew grim. Weeks of water passed with no land in sight. The ship's supplies dwindled, wood creaked under the strain, and the crew searched the waters for any floating branch or bird that might prove they weren't lost in a void. If the globe were actually the size Columbus claimed, they would have reached Asia weeks earlier. On a true-to-scale map, the ships would have run out of food and water thousands of miles before hitting a single shore. Their survival was an accident of geography. They reached land only because an unmapped continent happened to be blocking their path to a destination they were never going to reach. On October 12th, the crew went ashore on an island in the Bahamas. The inhabitants called it Guanahani. Columbus renamed it San Salvador, claiming it for the Spanish crown. While Columbus viewed the arrival as a discovery of a new world, he had stepped into a landscape already filled with established homes, trade networks, and indigenous names for the world around them. Because his math still pointed to Asia, Columbus assumed he was in the Indies. He labeled the people Indians, a name that grew from a calculation error and persisted for centuries. This meeting was an unequal encounter between a mission aimed at possession and a society that was already whole. The focus of the mission quickly shifted from navigation to extraction. As Columbus moved through Cuba and Hispaniola, he began assessing the land specifically for its value in gold and resources that could be claimed for Spain. On Christmas Day, 1492, the Santa Maria ran aground off the coast of Hispaniola. Columbus took the disaster as a strategic opportunity. Men used timber from the wreck to build La Navidad, the forced European settlement. 39 men were left behind. The first permanent foothold for a European empire was constructed from the wreckage of a ship that had failed to reach its intended destination. Columbus returned to Spain as a hero. Despite the evidence, he remained convinced he had reached the outer parts of Asia. The cost of the error became clear when he returned to Hispaniola on his second voyage. La Navidad was destroyed, and his men were dead, an early indication that this expansion would be defined by violence and resistance. Columbus died without ever realizing he had reached a continent unknown to Europe, forever tethered to the mathematical mistake that launched his career. The immediate result of the 1492 voyage was the beginning of systemic colonization, enslavement, and the spread of epidemic diseases that devastated indigenous populations. This voyage permanently merged two hemispheres that had been separated for millennia, initiating a massive transfer of wealth and a catastrophic loss of life for those already living in the Caribbean. The 1492 voyage was a collision that triggered a new global order. It turned a maritime mistake into a centuries-long campaign of expansion, creating the trade networks and borders